The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome. This is Brett with Typing Agent. Thank you for joining me for the next hour as we go over the teacher training webinar. So before we get started, just wanted to call out, there's a couple different roles within the program. Of course, there's the student. At the other side, there's a district administrator. There's also a school administrator as well as the teacher. If you're a school administrator, you might see a few more options here on the left-hand side, like a teacher or a school setup tab. Everything we're going to be going over today here in the teacher training is going to apply to you as well. It's the same interface that you have. The only thing that will be missing that you have is just those two tabs. So if you do see a couple other things on that side, know if you are teaching students and need to know how to manage your class and what the student experience is like, you are in the right webinar. I am going to be keeping everybody on mute as we go through. Invariably, somebody starts having a really fun conversation, it becomes a little distracting. So if while I'm going through the presentation, you do have any questions, please go ahead and send them through the GoToWebinar panel, and then I'll pause at appropriate moments during the presentation to answer any questions that have come through. If for any reason during the presentation you need to step away and you miss some of the information, just wanted to call out a couple of the resources available to you. And while you can get to the Solution Center in the program, I like to get to it from our website just so I can pop back and forth between the two. And there is a couple recorded videos, teacher classroom management, the student experience, school schedule test, and these cover a lot of the same topics that we're going to be going over today. Under the webinars, there is also a recorded teacher webinar. So has a lot of the same information though it's from last year. So we'll have another recording up there pretty soon with the latest and greatest. But these are some other options available for you if for any reason you miss something or you need to step away. To get started then into the program, when you first log in, you're going to see this dashboard. Now there's a few options from this dashboard, including the top navigation bar. When you log in, you may not at this point see a class listed on your dashboard. There's a way that you can manually determine when a class is going to be listed on your dashboard. And if you only have one or two classes, probably not the most useful feature, but if you're like a technology instructor, you have 60 classes that you're teaching throughout a week or a couple week period, there is the ability to set which day those classes show up in your dashboard, which kind of makes it easier within the program to keep track of all of your classes and to keep it organized. The other reason you might see a class show up here, even if you didn't set it up so that it would proactively show up on that particular day, is if any students of your classes have completed any work in their curriculum on that day, then your class will pop up and show you, and you could consider that like a notification that something's been done in your class that day. Also, if you're starting that class, it just makes it easier when you sign in, if they've already done some work, that it's right there available for you. You don't have to go into classes and look at your list. Couple other things that are available up here. From the profile section, you can update your password, pretty standard. Under this bell icon, there are a couple things I wanted to show you. One of them is the updates. We do some pretty big updates during most summers, and so we usually send out an email and kind of make a couple emails into your inbox. We send some messages through the program itself. However, whenever we're doing any minor updates, we like to let you know a little bit less obtrusively here in the program itself. So if you see this number start to tick up a little bit, it might be that we have some updates that have come out, and you can keep track of those right through here. The other thing that it will show you is any students that are in your school that are listed as unassigned. That means they're not assigned to any class. Now, for most teachers, some administrator, whether in the district or the school, is handling getting all the data loaded into the program so that you can focus on just using the program and teaching. However, in some cases, you might find you get a directive from your administration that we've loaded all the students in there, but at the time we did it, we didn't know whose class they were going to be in. So we need you as the teachers to go in and find your students and move them into your own class. If you get any sort of direction like that, this is where you're going to find them by clicking on the bell icon, coming to unassigned, and moving them here. If you accidentally move some students or any students, a class gets deleted and the students move to unassigned, again, this is where they're all going to be listed. You could just click on them, and you could click the move button and move them back into your class. The next thing up here on the top navigation bar I want you to be aware of is this question mark. This question, clicking on it, it's going to open up a chat window with Typing Agent support. We're not always able to respond immediately, but usually we respond within an hour or less. This is a great feature if you have a quick question. Maybe you have some students up at your desk, you're trying to get a couple other things done. You don't have time to open up your email and email us, and you certainly don't have time to call us. you can always just send us a quick message, know that we're going to reply and get back to you. If you log out of the program before we reply, then it will go to your inbox in your email, so you'll see that that reply has come in once it comes in. So that's a great way to get a hold of us. The last thing on here I wanted to show you is it's a link to our teacher guide. As you can see, it's only 15 pages long. The purpose of the teacher's guide isn't so much to be an in-depth, step-by-step for everything that you can do in the program, but really to give an overview of keyboarding itself and how our program is put together and how to use it. So it goes over things such as how we meet Common Core standards, how we've implemented ISTE standards, how to get started, how to get your students logged in for the first time. This is information we'll go over during the webinar, but this is a great resource to come back and take a look at some of the more common features or things that are unique to Typing Agent that you may not have seen in other classes that you've done typing in. One other thing that I wanted to call out in here before we move too much further on is our curricula. We have two curricula in the program. We call them Dynamic Curriculum and Classic Curriculum. Really, these aren't so much a difference in the sort of lessons that your students are going to be receiving, but more how the program is used. The difference between them is the Dynamic Curriculum has a lot of automation built in. It's a little more plug and play, and it's also the default interface that you as the teacher and your students would be using. And so this is, as a teacher, you don't really have to do anything. Once your students are in the program, they log in, they can start typing right away, even if you yourself have never logged into the program at all. So that's kind of the beauty of it, making it as simple as possible for your students to get started, even if you haven't gone in and set anything up yourself. In that automation, there's two features of it that I want to call out. One of them, it has to do with kind of classroom time management. Traditionally, if you have a typing course, you'll have some students in the class that can type quicker than other students. You'll have some students that type way slower than other students. And that causes the issue of how do I keep the students who type quicker entertained so they're not distracting from the rest of the class when they get done? And then how do I keep that student who's struggling a little bit more motivated to continue forward when it can feel to them like they're holding up the class? And that's never a good time. So with the automation, we've made it so that the actual length of content for the lessons for the students will adjust to the student's ability. Our goal is to always keep the students a little bit challenged, so they're always striving to improve without overwhelming them. So in that example where you have some students, let's say the average is 40 words per minute, but you have a student who can type 70 words per minute and you have a student who can type 20 words per minute. The one who can type 20 words per minute is going to get enough content that it should take them about 1 to 2 minutes to be able to complete their lesson, so maybe about 30 words. The student who can type 70 words per minute is also going to get enough content that at their level they complete the lesson in 1 to 2 minutes, so they're going to be getting more like 100 words per minute. So it adjusts to their proficiency so that both are challenged to improve at their pace, and then everybody's kind of working and completing lessons approximately the same time as they go through. The second thing that Dynamic Curriculum has in it that has a major impact on how you and the students are going to use it is a time requirement. By default, students are going to be required to spend a certain amount of time in each one of the units before they can move on to the next unit. So for example, Unit 1, they'd be required to spend 41 minutes practicing the home row before they can move on to Unit 2, where they're going to be practicing the top row, where they would then have 41 minutes before they can move on. Now, you can adjust this time frame, but the main goal of it, especially in a more plug-and-play environment or where it's not, maybe it's an extracurricular activity or it's not as classroom-led, we want to make sure that the students have an incentive to slow down, take their time, focus on accuracy over just bashing their keyboard trying to get through as quickly as possible. Students usually want to get through fast. However, it's the slow practice that's going to actually make them speedy at the end. So it's just kind of an incentive to slow down, is that there's no benefit for going quick in the program. So those are just two of the automations that we get the most questions about and kind of the most relevant into how the program could be used in your environment. Contrast that to Classic Curriculum. That has no automation whatsoever, and it's a virtual recreation of having a typewriter and a keyboard in front of you. So in the Classic Curriculum, really that's intended more for teachers who are already familiar with teaching typing or who have become familiar and they want to do their own customization. So instead of just letting the automation of Typing Agent take over, they want to go in, they want to spend the time to manage that environment themselves. And so we'll go over how you can swap between them and some of the differences in the features available when we go through the teacher classroom section. Outside of the dashboard, the next section down is classes. This is probably where you're going to spend most of your time in the program. This is where you can see all the classes assigned to you and all of your students. I'm going to skip going into detail on this section for just a moment. This is where we're going to spend most of the presentation, and I want to end on it. So I'm going to jump ahead real quick to progress, and then we'll take a look at class setup, and then we'll come back to classes in about 5 minutes. When you're looking for information on the progress for your classes, so reports, you come to the progress section, and you've got 4 different options here at the top. Under week, you're going to see information about activity that has occurred that week. So if student has completed work on a particular day, if you can click on it, see what class they were in, and then click on it, and you can see the name of the person as well as how well they did, if they earned any stars, what their accuracy, words per minute. And so you're going to see this for any student who completed any work in that class or in multiple classes on that day. And so if you're kind of keeping track of anything on a week-by-week basis, this is a great way that you can do that. Next section over is going to give you a lot of different report options. I'm not going to go over each report individually during this webinar. I'm going to just kind of talk about 3 of them in particular. Something I did want to show you is under the classroom management, which is where a lot of the teacher information is. There is a reports overview that will give you kind of the context of each of the reports and how you can use it. But some of the 3 most popular reports would be the activity report. This is going to give you the option to, for either a single student or all students, you can see a list of everything that they've done since they started in the program. So it'll give you, just like when we saw it week by week, it gives you all their statistics, tells you when they completed the lesson, what they completed as they go through. Next report that I wanted to call out is the scheduled test trend. You as a teacher have the ability to create a scheduled test from within your classroom. And a scheduled test is one that you've created. It's a custom test. There's a library of information from Typing Agent that you can pull from, or you can use your own content. And this is a great way that you can do a before and after assessment using the same content if you need to do kind of a proof of how well your students have improved and you want to use it that way. Some teachers also use it if you are giving like a pass-fail sort of grade for the typing class. They might give an assessment of their own choosing at the very end of their course and set a threshold for students to pass. It can be used for a variety of purposes, but when you're ready to come take a look at the results, this is the report that you would want to use. It's the scheduled test trend. And one of the things that it will give you is the ability to compare 2 different tests. If I want to see just one test, I just select the same test twice. But if I want to see the before and after and see what the delta in improvement is, then I can do a comparison and have all of that provided for me. And then you could either just record it from there, you could even export it into a CSV file. So that's the scheduled test trend. And we'll go into a little bit more detail. I'll show you where you actually create that scheduled test once we look at the classes section. The third report I wanted to show you is the time report students. This is going to show you how much time your students have spent in the program, and it's broken up by classroom. So you can look at all time, you can look by week or month by month. I know that some districts and some schools, they give like a pass-fail based on how much time students have spent in the program versus looking at just an accuracy or words per minute. So this is where you could come in to check all of that time. Something important to note about time and how time is recorded in Typing Agent is we don't just record time from when they log in to when they logged out. Otherwise, you could show a student was typing for 2 hours simply because they logged in, went and got a drink of water, watched the movie, came back. Typing Agent only counts time in the program for the time that they've actually spent doing something in the program. So that would be completing a lesson, a test, one of those scheduled tests we just talked about, leaderboard practice, which we'll go over, playing games, and then we'll also show you a total time. And this can come up probably a few times a month. We get a question from a teacher, hey, I've got this really upset parent. They said that their child was at home, they were in the program for an hour, and I know they're supposed to do a half an hour a week, but it's only showing they did 12 minutes. What's going on? Why are you cheating my student and not giving them the grade they deserve? And so it's important to make sure that everybody using it understands that you don't get credit just for logging into the program. You have to actually do work in the program for it to count. Right? Next tab over we have is archive reports. This is all of the same reports as what we were just looking at, but if you had students in the program in the previous year and you knew what class they were in, you'd be able to look up their data from last year as well. So essentially, just think of this as looking up the student data from last year based on the class they were in during the previous year. And the fourth option is a report card. If you are doing any sort of grades for it, you can print out a report card either for a single student or all. You can choose specific dates that the report card's for. You can weight the individual units. You can put in your own comments. And then when you create it, it's going to come up and show a grade based on the grading scale. And I'll show you where you can set that under classes. The important thing to note about the report cards is that this time there's not a way to tell the report card what work a student should have done. We kind of have a default expectation that throughout the course, the students will be expected to go through units 1 through 10, at least the older students. But I know that not all classes have time to get through all of that throughout the time. But if you, for example, in this case, in this student in my demo account, I've only done lessons in Unit 1, but maybe as the teacher, I had assigned Unit 1, 2, and 3 to the students. This program is only going to give a grade for the report card based on what the student did in Unit 1, because this time there's no way to tell it that it should have also looked at Units 2 and Units 3 and seen that there's no work done. So if that makes sense, again, just try to summarize that real quick. It only counts work done, not work not done that you may have wanted done. All right, that was a bit of a tongue twister. Okay, so that is the 4 options under progress. Class setup is where if you as a teacher are being required to add in your own classes and students and you have more than a few, so you want to maybe upload a CSV file if you're familiar with them, this would be where you would go to do multiple classes and multiple students in multiple classes at once. You would load your classes first, then your students. I'm not going to go into too much detail because so few teachers end up having to do this themselves. But if you do need to do it, there's a sample CSV file you can download. There's information about what you need to put into the CSV file. And then there's a simple step-by-step process to upload it, review the data, and then confirm it. And you can do that for both the classes and the students. If this is something you need to do and you're not as familiar with CSV files, we have a video to help walk you through it. Under the all videos, there's uploading classes for teachers, students, and schools. This is geared towards that school admin. However, it's the same process for teachers as well. So you'll get some good information from there if you need to do that and you're not familiar with CSV files or you otherwise have any questions about it. All right, and coming back to classes. When you get into the program, you might see your classes here more in kind of a tile layout. If you want to get into your class and see the details, you can just click on the class name and it'll bring you right into the class. You also have some options to see your class theme or your settings. If you accidentally click delete classroom, don't worry, it's a 2-step process. You can just cancel that. You can see if anybody's used any of the social tools that we include with it, which we'll go over in detail in a little bit. Now, I myself prefer more of a list view. I've spent a lot more time looking at Excel spreadsheets than I have at looking like application tiles. So I like this view a little bit more. I think it gives me a little bit more information up front. And if I'm using this view, then if I want to get into a program, I just use the view icon. And this is going to get me right into the class where I can start viewing my settings and utilizing all the tools available. Before I go through what's available in all of these tabs and all the tools, to make it contextual, I want to show you what's available, or rather, I want to show you what the student experience is like, so then we can relate all the settings back to what the students go through. Now, we have 2 interfaces in Typing Agent. One of them is for students in kindergarten through 2nd grade, and that's this interface here. It's a little bit more cartoony. We've got a Yeti mascot that will come up, and everything being written on the screen is also being verbally spoken. Wouldn't necessarily expect kindergartners to be able to read all of that, especially in that time frame, but they're going to hear an audio of that as well. At the most basic, all a student in kindergarten through 2nd grade needs to do to get through the program is click this start button. Of course, in kindergarten, you might have a lot of students coming in who've never used a mouse before. Maybe they've only used touch screens. We do have a mouse lesson that takes them probably about 5 to 10 minutes to get through, and it teaches them how to move the mouse, how to drag and drop, how to click, all of those good things. Obviously, somebody is going to need to help get them at least far enough to where they start getting the information on how to use it, but then we'll take over and do the heavy lifting of giving them the repetition and the practice on using a mouse. After they learn how to use the mouse, then there's an option to go through key skills where Felix and Amy are going to teach the students how they should be sitting, how they should be holding their hands, where their fingers should be on the keyboard, and teaching them the ergonomics of typing. Once they've completed all of that and they have everything ready to be able to use the program and type effectively without doing anything that's going to hurt them later in life, then they get into the actual core learning of it. Each one of these flags is going to have a learn to type tutorial and a practice lesson. The learn to type tutorials don't count towards time in the program. Probably take most students about 5 minutes to get through. And it is a narrative where Igor pops up. And again, anything written on the screen is also audio to the students. And there's going to be a storyline that they go through while they're learning two keys, in this case, FJ and the space key. So in the first one, I suppose 3 keys, including the space. So they're going to be helping Professor Cordius clean his lab coat using the laser, and it's going to tell them exactly what they need to do, where the keys are, where their fingers should be, and kind of lead them through this narrative tutorial. Once they finish the tutorial and they come back and say they're starting this initial flag, they're going to get a practice lesson practicing the keys that they just learned. So then this interface, if they press the wrong key, it's going to show up in red. Down here, it's going to show them in green what they should be pressing, which finger they should be using, and it will not let me go on until I make that correction. So if I press the wrong button, I cannot continue until I fix that. And I'm just going to finish this one real quick so you can see what happens at the end. There we go. It will come up with a list of how many stars they've earned, their accuracy, their words per minute. All your student needs to do to continue on to the next one, especially for the younger students, this is probably not going to mean as much, is click this blue back to climb, and then they just click the start button to continue on to their next lesson. Now, as you can see here in this demo account, I've gone all the way to flag 6, and there's more than one practice lesson. The Climb tab is going to take your students all the way through the home row, top row, and bottom row. So they're going to learn all the core keys of the keyboard. So flag 6 is the end of learning the home row. So there's additional practice lessons to put it all together and then an assessment at the end. And so you'll see that for the top row as well as the bottom row when the student gets to the top of the mountain. Now, by default, when one of your students first logs into the program, if they're in kindergarten through 2nd grade class, they're only going to see this Climb tab, this Awards tab where they can see some of their progress, and the Exit tab. These other tabs I have open to demo to you are not going to be available to them until they've completed the Climb to Mountain. At that point, this Learn to Type tab is going to be an aggregation of all of their tutorials that they went through. So those are those narrative storylines where they're learning the initial 2 keys on each lesson. So this is one place they could come back to do them all over again. There's going to be a practice tab that will open. For your students, it'll show units 1, 2, and 3 completed. They'd have the option now from this interface, instead of going and clicking the red start button, if you wanted them to do additional, more advanced lessons, they would do it here. Now, I will point out that unless you have maybe Chromebooks for some of your students, since those have a smaller keyboard, or otherwise, unless your school has shelled out for keyboards specific for younger students that are smaller, students at this age level may not have the hand span to be able to, for example, learn sentences and punctuation, because they're not going to be able to press both the shift key and hit some of the other letters required. So what we find for most students or teachers in this grade levels is they're just going to have them do the climb and get the basics and foundation of the keyboard down. And then as they grow into the ability to span the entire keyboard, they're going to have that leg up. You know, once they get to 3rd grade, 4th grade, they're going to be able to pick up that proficiency that much quicker because they already have that foundation. If, however, you have students that have used it in kindergarten, 1st grade, they're now in 2nd grade, they're able to hit all the appropriate keys and you want them to continue on, this is where they would do it if you want them to start moving on to more advanced lessons involving more complicated key combinations. The other tab that's going to open up is games. And the reason games don't open up until they've completed the climb is some of these games, or most of these games, will use any key from the home row, top row, and bottom row. So by completing the climb section, they're also learning everything they need to be able to successfully play the games. And so the games would become available to them at that point and per the default. So this is the kindergarten through 2nd grade environment. If you're in a class associated with kindergarten, 1st grade, or 2nd grade, this is what your students are going to see when they log in. Now, if you're in a class associated with 3rd grade through 12th grade, it's going to be a little bit different. And something I'll point out is while the interface is the same for all of these grades, 3rd through 12th, the actual content and the default targets and other defaults are all different depending on the grade level. So for example, the content a third grader is typing is appropriate to a third grader. The content an eighth grader is typing is appropriate to an eighth grader, and same for everybody in between and beyond. So in here, they have more of a smartphone interface with their applications. The primary one that they're going to be using would be the agent lesson training. This is going to bring them to a list of their units, and then within the units, they can take a look at all of the lessons and move through. Now, something to take a note of on here is there's going to be two graphs, a circular graph and then a bar graph. The bar graph tells them how many lessons they've done in that particular unit. There's 10 lessons in each unit, so each 10% is a lesson. We had mentioned before at the beginning that by default in the dynamic curriculum, there's a time requirement of how much time a student must spend in each unit. This circular graph tells them how much time they have required out of and how much time they have remaining out of that time. So a student can always keep track of that as well. In the unit itself, there's going to be there are 10 core lessons, and then there's 3 optionals. These are all enabled by default, but these are things that the teacher could toggle off if you wanted to. There's going to be a unit test that covers all of the material that was learned in the 10 core lessons. The tests are a little bit different than the lessons themselves. In the test, the students would have 2 minutes to complete as much of the text as possible. We wouldn't expect most students to be able to complete it. There's enough text there, though, that they should be able to type for at least the entire 2 minutes. They'll also be able to make mistakes, unlike what you saw when I was demonstrating as the K through 2. So in a test that allows mistakes, students cannot go back and fix them. So it's really important that when they're using a unit test, that they're focusing on that accuracy so that their accuracy and their words per minute don't get tanked because they're rushing through and not paying attention to that accuracy. So the test just functions a little bit different than the core lesson. Frequently mixed letters is going to give them an option where some letters will rain down and they get a chance to type the letters. These are the letters that they had the most trouble with within the unit. And so it's a fun, short activity that allows them to practice kind of the muscle memory for those keys that they had trouble with. And then the last thing is leaderboard practice. So you'll have a situation where some students get all the way to the end of the 10 core lessons. Maybe they even got 3 stars on all of them, and they're, hey, teacher, I don't have anything left to do in here. I have no goals within the program, because they're not thinking that just the repetition is going to help them with their words per minute become more proficient typers. They're looking for achievable goals within the program, and now they have none. So they could come and do the leaderboard practice. These are going to be additional lessons that cover all the content from that particular unit, and it also gives them a score. So it can also be used as friendly, positive competition within the classroom, where students who have gotten to the end of their 10 core lessons have time remaining, and then can do some additional lessons, get a score for it, get up on the leaderboard. So this leaderboard up here is going to show the students with the top 6 scores, and it's only going to show the students with the top 6 scores. So that's all the students will be able to see. You can see everybody's score. Students can only see the top 6. Now, if you get a student who says, hey, I'm doing the lessons, but I'm not getting any more score, it might be because they have this closed icon up here at the top. One thing we found is that especially the more competitive students, if we didn't stop them from being able to achieve a score at some point, they would never move on to the additional units, which is not a good experience, especially if the students are doing this in a more self-paced environment. So once that student has reached the amount of time that they needed to spend in that unit to be able to complete it, the leaderboard closes as far as being able to gain a score, incentivizing the student to go ahead and move on to the next unit. This score that a student achieves in one leaderboard is going to be remaining till the next leaderboard. So for example, on the next leaderboard, I'd be starting with a score of 572, and any points I earned would just be added on top of it. So through the 10 units, the 10 leaderboards, their points are additive. So they're not losing anything by stopping here, moving on through the next unit, and then getting to the next leaderboard. So it's just another component within the program to kind of incentivize students to focus on that accuracy and give them an extra activity to do and compete with their friends. So that is the core lessons and units. There's quite a few other tools that are available to them as well. One of those is some social tools. Now, if you're using any sort of digital citizenship course with your students, you have the option to use these tools that come with Typing Agent. One of them is SpyMail, which is like an email app only within the program. That is to say that students they have no email address. They can't email externally, nor could anybody else email into the Typing Agent program. And then the other one is called Agent Book and is a bit like a common social media platform out there that you might be familiar with. The SpyMail has just a simple interface. You can come in, they can compose messages. By default, they can only send a message to their teacher. You can enable it so they can send messages to the rest of their classmates. So especially if you're using this as part of a digital citizenship course, or you're otherwise teaching them the appropriate etiquette of sending an email, you could enable them to send messages to each other. Now, aging myself a little bit, back when I was a kid in elementary school, if I wanted to send a message to another student, I had to write it on a piece of paper, hope the teacher didn't notice. I'm pretty sure you guys noticed more than we thought as students. And then I had to hope that between me and whoever I was sending it to, all the students I had to pass it through, none of them had a grudge against me and wanted to turn it into the teacher. Nowadays, of course, everybody can send text messages to each other. They can email each other. They can message each other through a variety of chat programs. So it's probably a lot harder, I would imagine, to keep track of everything going on in your class because of that. Typing Agent wanted to make that a little bit easier for you. So though the students wouldn't know it unless you told them, any message that a student sends within the SpyMail application, you are essentially given a carbon copy of it. So you always see all messages that a student sends. Even if a student thinks they're really clever, they send a message, they tell the recipient to delete the message, they delete the message, you still see that message and can see what your students are sending. So you can kind of keep an overwatch that way. The other digital citizenship tool is Agent Book. And so this is where you as a teacher can post to a wall. So the only way for students to interact with this is if you proactively post to that wall. If you don't post to the wall, they don't have anything to interact with. And then they can come in and write a comment as long as comments are open. So this can be used in a couple ways. One, teaching students the appropriate way to interact with each other in a social media platform, maybe teaching the idea of consequences and how once you write something on the internet, it never disappears. The other cool way that I've seen teachers use this is to help students learn how to collaborate online effectively. So how to collaborate using this sort of platform and using just the written word. So they might put a discussion topic, they might put a project, and then the students can only discuss it using these comments and writing to each other on here, which I thought was a great way to help students learn how to effectively communicate with each other and their ideas in the written format in a digital sort of medium. So that's another use that you might be interested in using it for. Of course, students would also have games. Something I would note about the games is they are meant to be supplementary to the core curriculum. The games themselves, of course, require the students know how to type, at least know where the keys are, but they're not a primary teaching tool. They can reinforce what a student has already learned, but they're not necessarily going to learn the appropriate skills just by playing games. Now, you do have the option to turn games off. You can even gamify games where they have to complete lessons to earn something called grit coins, which they then have to spend to be able to play games. And I'll show you where that is in the teacher settings when we finish up here with this student interface. Next section over, under the My Account, they have an option to see their awards, their last typing stats. They can change the color of their phone cover, what their icon looks like. If you have enabled it so that students can change their own password, that's going to be available here. By default, that's turned off and they wouldn't see it. But if you do enable it, this is where a student would go in to do it. They also, in this interface, have the ability to see some reports. So similar to what you can see, only it's just for their own data. So you can see by the week, by the year, that full detail list, just like we saw under the activity report under progress. They have also a more visual one, and the key to what each of the icon means is right up here by hovering over. And then they can do a time report as well. So all of that's available to the students directly from within the program. Now, another neat tool that we have, excuse me, is Documents. This allows you to create, using a rich text editor within the program, students can do their own creative writing. Another really strong use that this has gained over the last couple of years in states following Common Core, a lot more assessments are being pushed down to 4th grade. And what a lot of teachers are telling us is, and district administrators, is that their students know how to pass all the questions, they know the information, but they're not used to the interface, And so they're not necessarily able to show that they know all the information in the time and in the format allotted to them. So if you're not in a place where you're using like Google Documents or Microsoft Word, you have a rich text editor here in Typing Agent that you can use. And a cool thing you can do is put up a question on the board and then say, hey, students, you've got 5 minutes or you've got 10 minutes, whatever the case may be, to answer it. It's a good practice for them instead of just copying information on the screen and typing that, and actually being able to type what they're thinking, because that's going to slow them down a little bit at first, because it's a new skill that they'll have to practice and get used to. Once they've put in their document, they can save it. So they could always save it and edit it, come back to it later. They can print it out using this icon, or they can also send it to the teacher digitally using the spy mail feature if you haven't disabled it. So these are they can save it, print it, send it to you electronically, and then you can see their work. Outside of that, the Help Me section just gives them an overview of all of these tiles, like what we're going over right now. And then the Type Code section is some additional lessons that have to be enabled. This will not appear unless the teacher's enabled it. This top one, the Flappy Typing Game, it's going to teach the students HTML and JavaScript, or at least give them an overview of it. Now, we are a typing program, not specifically a coding program. So a program that's more dedicated to coding is going to start students out with the logic, a lot of drag and drop. Our focus is, of course, making sure that students can type. So they're going to have to actually type out the code necessary to make everything work. So these lessons are a little bit more complex. Use keys from special characters, numbers, all the punctuation, odd grammar. So we definitely recommend that it's most usable by students who have at least gotten through Unit 8, which is what's going to teach them all of the special characters, all the numbers, and everything else that they might have to type. And these are just a little bit more complex. So it's a good challenge for students who have maybe been in the program for a couple years and need that challenge to progress. In addition to the JavaScript and HTML that they'll learn during the Flappy Typing Game, which by the end they'll have actually created a game to play, we also have some lessons in Python. Python Pirates doesn't have a game at the end. Each one of these is an individual lesson showing something different about the Python programming language. So these are available as an extracurricular activity. These don't get counted towards a grade or show up in the report. So it's definitely extracurricular activity that can be fun for your students once they've reached that typing proficiency. All right, so that is the kind of an overview of the interface for students in the grades 3 through 12. So now that we've got that under our belt, let's spend the next 15 minutes or so taking a look at all the options available to you as a teacher. So as a teacher, if I log in, if my class isn't appearing here, probably the first thing I'm going to do, click on my classes, and then get into the class that I have and that I want to take a look at. When it first opens up, it's going to open up to the Students tab. Now, if I am responsible for adding my own students into the program, in addition to doing it from this class setup, where I can do it for multiple classes at once, I could also manually one by one or upload just for this class from here as well. If I needed to create like a guest class and some guest accounts, I could use the block of students to just put some generic student accounts in there. So these would be options available to me. Otherwise, if you're just coming in to use it with your existing students, you're going to see their name, their username, and their password. We do show the password to the teachers and the admins, especially with the younger grades. This helps make sure that, you know, when a student forgets their password, that you as a teacher, you don't have to spend time contacting anybody. You don't have to spend time trying to reset a password. You can just look at the password and help the student get into the program. Something else that can help with that, especially at the beginning of the school year, is under this blue action button, there's a few options. One of them is to print student login cards. So I can come in here and print out student login cards that have both the website that I should be going to and the username and the password. Just real brief digression, each account has its own unique login portal to use for Typing Agent. So for example, for my test account, it's btest.typingagent.com. This is the demo. You'll have your own, probably your school or your district name up here and some options. This is how we recommend that both you as teacher and your students log into the program. If you just go to our main page and click on the general login button, you're going to have to put in that school domain because people might have the same username across different domains. And so if you don't put in, for example, the btest, it doesn't know which account you're actually trying to log into since your username is only unique to your account, not across the entire program. And so you might find some students or even as teachers that you have a little bit of trouble getting in from here. So I'd definitely recommend finding out what your unique login portal is, and then just bookmark that for yourself and your students. If you send this home with your students, then just make sure they're aware, or that their parents are aware, that this is the site that they want to go to if they're not going to remember what their domain is every time. So that will help get students into the program. That's all in the teacher guide as well. The last thing that you can see on here is the percentage of the curriculum completed and when the student last logged in. Something to note is that there's 10 units, there's 10 core lessons in each unit, so there's 100 lessons. So each percentage point is a lesson completed. So for example, at 13, I know the students completed all of Unit 1 and has completed through the third lesson in Unit 2. Something else I can do from here is view details about a specific student. So I can get a snapshot of their information, see what badges they've earned, and I can see all of those same reports that they could see under their interface, I can see as well, even the time reports. So while I can get all of my classes information under progress, if I really just wanted to look at a single student for any reason, it might be quicker and easier just to get that information from the student's profile from the teacher view, then going and running a report from here. Definitely less steps at least. You also have the option to edit the username or the password if necessary. And then as you saw, we have the option to even log in as the students and see exactly what they're seeing. The tab to the left of that, the activity tab, this is going to show you everything that the student has done in the last 24 hours. So this refreshes every 24 hours and is really more than seeing what they did historically. It's meant to allow you, while the students are in the class typing, if you're at your desk versus walking around, it gives you an opportunity to still see what everybody's doing. So, okay, Brett started the code lesson. As soon as Brett completes the code lesson, it's going to show me that as well. If I see that somebody logged in, but they haven't started anything else, and I know that somebody just sitting idle in the program, not actually typing. Even if I look up and it looks like they're on the keyboard, they may be, they're just not in typing agent. So this is a way you can keep track of what everybody's doing real time within the program. To the right of students, we have a curriculum tab. So this is a place where that same kind of visual icon-based report available to students, you have it available in here as well. So you can see just at a quick glance within the class itself where all your students are at in the units and how well they're doing. Again, highlighting up here at the top in the key, what the icon, it'll show you what that icon means. Beside that, we have an option for mapping. So we had talked about how in dynamic curriculum, there's a requirement to spend a certain amount of time from the student in each one of the units. This is where you can come in and see the default, and this is where you can also come and make changes to that default, whether you want to increase it or decrease it. So when you first log in, you're going to see that all of this is blank. This is going to show 510, and this is going to show 41 minutes for the first 4 units. It'll be 84 minutes for the next 3 units, and it'll just go up from there. The more complex the lessons get, the longer we would expect the student to have to spend in there to achieve their goals and the stars that they want to achieve within there. There's no requirement to move on to unit by unit that they achieve a certain amount of stars. The only requirement to move unit by default is based on the time in. So if I want to change that time, I would just fill out this formula. How frequency is how many times per week, time per session is how many minutes are they actually typing during that session. I have an option for how many words per minute I would expect the students to be able to type by the end of the course, and then I can put my start and end dates in. Once I click update mapping, that's going to adjust my time here, and I'm going to see my time adjusted here. The other thing that customizing this would do for you is this little graph at the bottom. Based on your start and end dates and your class benchmark, it's going to tell you how well your students are doing during that time. So you can see how many lessons they've completed, their adjusted words per minute. And then if it's in green, then the student is likely by the end of the course, in this case April 1st, to achieve, in this case, 25 words per minute because they're already typing 53. If you see anybody in yellow, it means that they're probably typing around 23, 24 words per minute. So they're on the cusp. They're not there yet. And if you see anybody in red, it's going to be indicative that based on that current student rate of progress and improvement, they will not get to 25 words per minute by the time the course is over on April 1st. So it's another way that you can look at a quick glance that based on the information you put in for a start and end date and what you want the students to type by the end of the course, whether they're going to succeed or not. Now, this is going to be defaulted by typing agent to their 2-star target. And we'll take a look at their star targets and go over that in a little bit more detail in just a moment after we finish up with these 3. Code is where you would enable or disable the code. If it's unchecked, the students will not see the coding option. If it's checked, the students see the coding option like we saw during the 3 through 12 student experience. The school testing schedule, when we looked at progress, I spent a few moments talking about that report that you could run where you could even do a comparison between two different custom tests that you provided as a teacher. This is where you would go to schedule that. Now, if I look over here under type, there's a couple that are say district. It's not shown on the screen, but it might also say school. And then the one that says classroom gives me the option to edit or delete it. Anything that you create yourself as a teacher is going to show up as classroom and giving you these edit and delete options. District administrators, if you're in a multi-school account, or a school administrator, also have the option to create and assign these tests to classes that meet a specific grade level. If that's the case, maybe they didn't tell you in advance that they were going to be sending and signing a test to your students. If you ever have a student say, hey, this test popped up on my screen and I have to complete it before I can move on, what's going on? You could always just double check in here to see if your district or your school assigned you your students a test and just neglected to say anything, or the memo got lost in the mail, as it were. To actually create it, you can come in here. You have a test, you choose when the test is going to be available. You can put in your own information. You can use from Typing Agent's library. There's a few other customizable settings. I'm not going to go into too much detail during this webinar. There is a video in the Solution Center. It's about a 4-minute video school schedule test that goes into it in excruciating detail if you want any assistance while you're going through and creating any sort of scheduled test. The next sub-tab over history, this just shows you a history of changes to the targets or other features or settings that either you've made or that an admin's made or anybody else who logged in as you had made. So maybe if you go on vacation or have time off for whatever reason, you have a substitute that's using your login, you come back, things seem a little bit wonky, you could come in here and see if they made any changes, and if so, what changes they made and when they made them. So that's kind of a way that you can keep track of change management. Next major tab over, the targets. The targets are what we would expect students to be able to achieve based on their grade level. We match their word per minute targets to Common Core standards. Now, in Common Core literacy standards, there's nothing that says how much a student must write or how many words per minute, or I should say quantity of words or quantity of words per minute they should be able to type to draw from. So we took it based on how many pages a student of a certain grade is supposed to be able to write in a single setting, the interpretation of that from influential educators across the US to come up with our numbers. So that's where all these defaults come from. They're intended to meet the Common Core requirements. Now, if you're following a different set of requirements or you have a slightly different interpretation of Common Core requirements, I've seen some people recommend even higher words per minute. For example, you do have the option to come in here and adjust it for your class. Your district or your school may also change the defaults as well. Now, while you can change these for your class, your words per minute, I do recommend leaving the accuracy the same unless you have a strong reason to change it. And the reason for that is, based on 5 years of data looking at in the program, we found that anything below 80%, students can make so many mistakes that they're not really incentivized to strive for that higher accuracy and still get a reward. So if it's less than 80% and they can still get 1 star, I don't really need to try that hard. On the other side of it, anything above 90% can become so punitive depending on the grade level and the lesson. Students might only make 1 or 2 mistakes and they're unable to achieve 3 stars because of it. So that can become such a high threshold that students are actually decentivized from trying to achieve it, and they just give up to achieve it. So we found that kind of the sweet spot is 80% for 1 star, 90% for 3 stars. And so, of course, you are welcome to change it if you'd like. I would just note that it might negatively impact the student experience in one of those ways. Something else you can do from here is individualize the targets. It's invariable that in your class, at some point, you'll have a student who's already really proficient, or you'll have a student that for some reason is not able to meet the expected requirements for whatever reason. You do have the ability to customize an individual student's targets to better match their, to be more challenging to them at their actual level. So if the expected for 2 stars is 25 words per minute, but you have somebody who can already type 50 words per minute, maybe you want to make their 1 star 51, so they have to try a little bit harder to get to it. You're going to make 53 for their 2 star and maybe 55 for their 3 star. So, and then here I would do the 90, 85, and 80. On the flip side, if you have somebody who's struggling to meet, for whatever reason, the 25 words per minute, and it's become to the point where they're struggling. They're not even keeping their head above water trying to make that, and so they're going to get pretty frustrated. You can reduce the targets to something that's still challenging without being overwhelming. So maybe they can do 11 words per minute to get 1 star. They could do 12 to get 2 star, and maybe 13 or 14 to get 3 star. So we can always kind of adjust these numbers for the individual to make it challenging, something that they have to strive for, but not so overwhelming that they'll never achieve it. So incremental progress, it may be all that we're looking for on a student-by-student basis. So those are some of the options, either by the class or by the individual student, and ways that you can adapt the typing targets to the individual student. If you make a bunch of changes and you realize you don't like them, you can always restore to the defaults. I'm going to pause there for just 1 second. I did have a question come through that I wanted to take a look at. The question is, if I have 7th graders that had keyboarding in 6th grade and I'd rather them concentrate on words as opposed to letter practice, is there a way to have those types of lessons only? Yes, and we'll get to it when we get to the settings tab. I'll show you. I will take just 30 seconds to say, learning to type is a lot like learning an instrument that involves your piano, saxophone, whatever the case may be. You need that repetitive practice is what's going to make them better. And you'll find concert pianists might still practice scales as a warm-up. And so I found myself coming into this job, I could type 60 plus words per minute. Now I can type 80 to 90 words per minute. And all of that is from doing demonstrations of the home row, top row, and bottom row. So students may look at those lessons as being, these are boring, these are beneath me. Those lessons are still useful even to students who already have some proficiency. So you can certainly bypass all of those lessons for a student, and I'll show you where in the settings tab. But I think it's really advantageous to even have proficient students spend time going through them. They'll be able to get through them quickly. You can always adjust the time requirement for them. So there's some other options. But if you do decide that it's the best thing for your class to disable them, I'll show you here under the settings tab when we get to it. So great question. The next tab over before we get all the way over here is the social tools. So this is where you interact with SpyMail and AgentBook. By default, SpyMail students can only send a message to you. This is where you would allow them to send them to everybody or disable it entirely. This is your interface. So even if students delete all the messages, they'll just show up under the archive tab. So again, unless you delete the message, you can see everything teachers have done. And then AgentBook is where you're going to post your messages to the wall. And then you can also have full kind of editorial control over all of the comments. You can turn comments off. You can delete your initial message. You can edit it. You can delete and edit anything else here as well, comments that are made if necessary. Next tab over is Gradebook. So we looked at the report card under progress. Some of the other reports can have a grade associated with them as well. And this is where you can choose what the thresholds are to achieve each individual grade. It's going to be defaulted to an A+ through F scale. However, not every school or district is using an A through F scale. So if you're using 1 through 5 or 5 through 1 or whatever the case may be, you can come in here and update it to anything that you want. It only accepts single values. So whatever you want the threshold to be, that's the only number you would put in there. For example, you wouldn't put 90 to 94. You'd just put 90, and then the next scale up would be 95. Same thing for words per minute, and then only one value is really required in here under grade as well. If you make some changes, but you decide that you don't like it, you can always restore. And then just so you know, if you come in here for the first time and you see that it's already set up different than what it shows here, maybe it's set up appropriately for your school or district, it's possible that a district administrator or a school administrator has already come through and made that change. All right, and moving on to the next section is messages. Messages are a one-way announcement that you can send to students within the program itself. So unlike SpyMail, which is two-way, messages allow you to just send during a targeted time frame a message that students can interact with, and by reading it, closing it, and then moving on. So it can be used as any sort of message. If you're in a class, for example, where it is an extracurricular activity, or you forgot that you need to tell students something about the program, or maybe, you know, I wanted you to finish units 1, 2, and 3. You can send them that message, use it for happy holidays, have a great weekend, welcome back, whatever the case may be for your message. It just gives you an option to send the students an announcement within the program itself. We have leaderboard. This is where you as a teacher would be able to see everybody that's in the top 6 as well as everybody who's not there. So you might have students ask you, how many more points do I need to get up on the board? You could come here and take a look and see. And then we have some of the other settings available. So class settings are where you can make some of the fundamental changes. For the most part, your grade is already going to be set appropriately. If for some reason you find you need to adjust it, you can do that here. Choose your grade, reset to class defaults, and save it. If you do want to enable students to change their password, it's enabled here. And this is where display on dashboard. So we saw that there's some classes that might appear on the dashboard. And this is where you would go ahead and choose which days your class is going to appear on the dashboard if you wanted to organize it that way within the program. Next section over is lesson settings. So back to that question that we had, if I want to allow my students to skip lessons. By default in the dynamic curriculum, as part of that automation, students can't skip lessons. They have to start from the beginning and go one lesson at a time all the way to the end. I think there's a lot of advantage to that the studies have shown. However, if it's appropriate in your class to allow them to bypass some lessons, you'll want to switch them to that classic curriculum, and then you'll want to take lessons in order off. So those lessons will still be available to them. They will just be able to bypass them. So if you don't want them doing the home row, top row, and bottom row, or some of the other, you know, learning the shift key or anything like that, you could have you would just assign them which units you want them to do at that point by verbally telling them. They'd be able to do any of the units. In the time that we have remaining, I'm not going to go through each one of these features in detail. You can click on or hover over the question mark next to it to go ahead and see what it means. The one that I really wanted to call out, though, is require 1 star, especially if you have students who already know how to type and you want to make sure they're focusing on their accuracy and achieving the targets. By enabling require 1 star, students cannot move on from a lesson until they've hit the 1-star requirements, and then at that point they can move on to the next lesson. So it's a way that you can use as quality control within the program itself. Now that may not be as appropriate for students who are learning to type the first time. They're going to make mistakes. They may not hit the targets on every single lesson, but that's all part of the learning process. But if you already have students with some proficiency, enabling this is a way to make sure that they're staying at that proficiency and getting better and not backsliding. And the last settings that we have are game settings. So this is where you can enable or disable games. I can disable all of the games just by clicking here. I can enable them again. I can disable individual games if I need to for any reason, or I can enable those grit coins that we discussed in the student interface. As a quick recap, grit coins are a way to gamify games where students have to complete a lesson to earn grit coins, and then they spend those grit coins on time to play a game. Each grit coin is worth 1 minute of gameplay. And how many grit coins a student gets per lesson is entirely up to you as the teacher. We recommend either 1, 2, or 3. The more time you spend typing per week, probably the less grit coins you want to give per individual lesson. And then another way that I see teachers use this is they keep grit coins on, but they turn games off for the week. And then their typing section, you know, whether their last time typing that week, Thursday, Friday, whenever it may be, the teacher will enable the games, and then they can kind of use those earned grit coins there at the end of the week for their last typing course to play the typing game. So that's one kind of a cool way that we've seen some of the teachers using it. So that is, in a very brief nutshell, most every feature available to you as a teacher in ways that you can kind of manage your class and how the students experience the program. Now, if you're anything like me, everything made sense while I was going through it, but whether it's 2 minutes, 2 hours, 2 days, 2 weeks later, and you go to do something yourself, or you do want to make a change of some sort yourself, it's no longer going to make sense whatsoever. And that's quite all right. I went through a ton of information today. I wouldn't expect anybody to, unless you've used the program already, to kind of get it all in. If that happens, no problem. Just give this button here a click, shoot us a message. We'll get back to you. We'd be happy to help. We have the information available in the Solution Center under the classroom management. A lot of what we discussed is available here. We have those videos that you can take a look at on school schedule tests. Teacher classroom management tells you all about the settings. Here, there's some shorter kind of snippets, 30 to a minute 30 videos. So maybe if you wanted a refresher on targets or on how to set your mapping, that's all going to be available here as well. So a lot of resources to help you have the most successful experience in the program possible. And really, I guess if I could give the biggest takeaway from this is, if you don't have the time or inclination to come into the program to do anything other than keep track of what your students are doing, your students are still going to have a good experience with the default dynamic curriculum, unless, like the other teacher, you wanted to bypass them some and you needed to come in and change your settings. So we wanted to make it as easy as possible to use, so it can be used straight out of the box, so to speak. But then there's all these other options should you want to use them, but you're by under no means do you need to use them for your students to have a successful experience in learning how to type using Typing Agent. So we are at the hour. I'm more than happy to stick around if any more questions come through. My question queue is currently clear, so I'll stick around for another moment, give my voice a rest for just a minute or two while I wait to see if any questions come through. All right, I'm not seeing anything coming through, and I am seeing people dropping off the webinar, so I'm going to go ahead and close it down. If I cut you off while you're trying to type a question, oh, I did have a hand raised, so I'll stick around for another moment while presumably a question is typed out. All right, still just got only a couple people on. It looked like somebody was typing a question, so I'll stick around for just another minute. There we go. All right. Is there a maximum number of students we can add? I have 16 classes and the average 21. The only maximum is how many ever licenses your account has. If you're in a district and you're loading your own students into the program, your district can also put an artificial threshold on how many students that a school can load, a teacher from a school can load into the program. So if you do get some sort of message and you're in a district that says you've hit your license limit, you'll want to contact the main person in charge of Typing Agent for your district. If you're that person and you're running into that cap and you have questions about it, just shoot us a message and we can take a look at it and confirm what's going on. All right, great question. Go ahead and if you would, just use that hand raise if you had, there we go. All right, you are very welcome. And Judy, everybody else has already left, so I'll stick around for one more second if you have any more follow-up questions. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and close down and I'll give it back the rest of your day. And Judy, since it is just doing me, I'm going to go ahead and take you off mute. That might be a little bit quicker than typing out any questions that you have. Hey, Judy, are you there? Nope, you've gone offline.